I never planned to say this, not because it isn't true, but because truth has weight, and I don't speak heavy things casually. Some thoughts are meant to be carried quietly until they become clear enough to stand on their own. This one reached that point. You need to hear it. I didn't arrive here through emotion alone. Emotion fluctuates. It reacts. It amplifies. What brought me here was something more reliable: observation. Time patterns repeating without effort. The kind of understanding that doesn't rush to announce itself. I noticed how this stayed with me even when nothing was happening. No conversation driving it, no moment reinforcing it, just presence consistent and unforced. That's when I realized this wasn't a feeling asking for attention. It was a truth asking for acknowledgement. I never planned to say this because I don't speak to feel silence. I speak when silence has done its work. Silence reveals what matters. It strips away noise and leaves only what can survive without reinforcement. This survive. I paid attention to how my thoughts behaved around you. They didn't spiral. They didn't seek reassurance. They didn't negotiate outcomes. They aligned. Alignment is rare. When something aligns, it doesn't compete with the rest of your life. It integrates into it. That integration changed how I moved. I didn't feel the need to accelerate anything. I didn't feel pressure to define or secure. I felt calm. Calm isn't hesitation. Calm is confidence without urgency. It's knowing something doesn't need to be rushed to be real. I never planned to say this because I respect timing. Saying something before it's ready damages it. But not saying it once it's ready does the same. There's a moment when clarity requires action, not forceful action, but honest expression. This is that moment. You need to hear that. I didn't imagine this. I observed it. I watched how consistency replaced intensity, how steadiness replaced excitement, how understanding replaced interpretation. Those shifts don't happen accidentally. They happen when something fits. I noticed I didn't need to manage my energy around you. I didn't adjust pace or tone to maintain balance. Things stayed balanced on their own. That told me this was an effort-based connection. It was structure-based. Structure lasts. I also noticed what didn't appear. No emotional spikes, no cycles of closeness followed by withdrawal. No need to read between lines. AIs of stability is information. It's valuable information. I never planned to say this because I don't make declarations to feel something. I make them to reflect something that already exists. This isn't a beginning, it's recognition. Recognition changes responsibility. Once you recognize something real, you have a responsibility to treat it honestly. Ignoring it doesn't preserve it, it distorts it. I don't distort what matters. I realized that my standards recalibrated quietly. Things that once seemed acceptable started feeling unnecessary. Not because they were bad, but because they weren't aligned. Alignment simplifies choice. Choice became easier. I never planned to say this because I don't want to create pressure. Pressure creates false agreement. I want clarity to arrive freely, not extracted through expectation. This isn't about reaction, it's about truth. Truth doesn't demand applause, it stands. You need to hear that what I feel isn't built on urgency or fear, it's built on stability. Stability that remained even when I stopped paying attention to it. Stability that didn't ask to be protected or defended. That kind of stability is rare. I noticed that silence didn't feel like distance. Space didn't feel like loss. Time didn't feel like a threat. When those things stop feeling dangerous, you know something has changed internally. Something did. I never planned to say this because I value restraint. Restraint isn't absence, it's control. Control allows precision. Precision prevents regret. I wanted this to be precise. So, here it is. You need to hear that this wasn't impulsive, it wasn't reactive, it wasn't influenced by a single moment. It was formed by many quiet confirmations that all pointed in the same direction. That direction didn't shift. I realized that I wasn't looking ahead to escape the present. I was comfortable where things were. Comfort without complacency is a strong signal. It means something is stable but still alive, alive without chaos. I never planned to say this because I don't want to overstate what doesn't need exaggeration. Exaggeration weakens truth. Simplicity strengthens it. So I'll say it simply. What I feel is real because it remained when I wasn't trying to feel anything. It stayed when attention moved elsewhere. It held its shape without reinforcement. That's how I know. You need to hear this. Not because it changes everything immediately, but because it clarifies everything quietly. Clarity is the foundation of any decision that matters. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I'm offering honesty. Honest placement of something that deserved to be said once it became undeniable. Undeniable doesn't mean dramatic. It means consistent. If you're listening to this and feeling calm instead of rush, that's intentional. Rush creates mistakes, calm creates accuracy. And if this message resonated with you, if you value clarity, patience, and truth that doesn't need noise, take a moment to like this video. If you appreciate thoughtful conversations built on long-term thinking, subscribe. And if something here felt personal, leave a comment, even a simple one. Progress matters. Clarity matters. Saying the right thing at the right time matters. And sometimes what you never planned to say is exactly what needs to be heard. I never planned to say this, and this part explains why the words waited as long as they did. Not because I was unsure, but because I was attentive. There's a difference. Uncertainty creates noise. Attention creates understanding. I wanted understanding to finish its work before I spoke. What followed the realization wasn't urgency, it was observation. I watched how this truth behaved when I wasn't engaging it. I watched what happened when life became busy, when focus shifted elsewhere, when days passed without emphasis. It didn't weaken. It didn't fade into the background. It stayed intact, unchanged by neglect. That matters. Notice how my internal state remains steady. No emotional pull, no anxiety about outcome, no impulse to secure anything. When something is real, it doesn't ask to be held constantly. It holds itself. I also noticed how clarity didn't demand expression. It didn't need to be spoken to feel valid, it simply informed decisions quietly. I chose differently without needing to explain why. My standards recalibrated on their own. That's when I knew silence had done its job. I never planned to say this because I didn't want the words to lead the truth. I wanted the truth to lead the words. Words spoken too early often end up carrying expectations they weren't meant to carry. I didn't want expectation, I wanted accuracy. Accuracy requires patience. I paid attention to how this truth interacted with time. Time usually erodes feelings that aren't grounded. It didn't erode this, it clarified it. Clarity doesn't rush to speak, it waits until doubt has exhausted itself. Doubt never arrived. I noticed that I wasn't negotiating with myself. I wasn't listing pros and cons. I wasn't weighing possibility. Yes. That absence of internal debate told me something important. This wasn't a decision being made. It was a recognition being acknowledged. Recognition changes responsibility. Once you recognize something true, you're responsible for how you treat it. Avoiding it doesn't protect it. Ignoring it doesn't preserve it. It distorts it. I won't distort what matters. I never planned to say this because I respect the impact words can have. Words shift dynamics. They invite interpretation that create gravity. I didn't want gravity before structure existed to support it. Structure exists now. I also noticed how my behavior didn't change to accommodate this truth. It didn't make me less disciplined. It didn't distract me. It didn't pull me out of rhythm. It integrated seamlessly. Integration is a sign of alignment. Alignment doesn't disrupt. I observed how silence between us didn't accumulate meaning. It didn't create stories or assumptions. It remained neutral. Neutrality in silence is rare. It means trust exists beneath it. Trust doesn't announce itself, it operates. I never planned to say this because I didn't want to convert clarity into pressure. Pressure distorts good understanding. I wanted whatever followed to remain voluntary, not reactive. This is voluntary. I also noticed that I didn't need reassurance. I didn't need confirmation. I didn't need feedback to maintain confidence. That independence told me this wasn't attachment driven by need. Need creates urgency. Choice creates steadiness. I never planned to say this because I didn't want emotion to speak louder than reality. Emotion can convince. Reality proves. Proof had accumulated quietly without performance. Performance wasn't needed. I paid attention to what didn't happen. No escalation, no dramatization, no internal pull toward declaration. That restraint wasn't suppression. It was precision. Precision is respect. I noticed how my perception sharpened instead of narrowed. I didn't idealize. I didn't filter. I saw clearly. Clear vision doesn't rush to speak. It waits until language can match it. Language caught up. I never planned to say this because I don't believe truth needs constant exposure. Overexposure weakens it. I wanted this to remain intact before it was named. Naming changes context. And now context is ready. You need to hear this. Not because something is about to happen, but because something already has. Understanding has completed its work. Silence has finished refining it. This isn't an opening move. It's a confirmation. I'm not asking you to respond. I'm not asking you to mirror anything. I'm offering transparency. placing something where it belongs instead of leaving it unspoken. Unspoken truth accumulates weight. Spoken truth releases it. I had a plan to say this because I don't speak to provoke reaction. I speak to establish reality. Reality doesn't need agreement to exist. It needs acknowledgement. I also want you to know that nothing changes if nothing changes. If not, Hing changes. This truth doesn't demand movement. It doesn't require acceleration. It simply sits where it is and forming choices quietly. Quiet influence lasts. I never planned to say this because I wanted certainty without dependency. I have that now. That's why the words can stand on their own without needing support. They don't need to persuade. You need to hear this because clarity deserves honesty. Because what's real should be treated with accuracy, not avoidance. And if you're listening to this and recognizing the moment when silence has done all it can do, you understand exactly why this is being said. Now, if this part resonated with you, if you value patience, clarity, and truth that doesn't rush, take a moment to like this video. If you appreciate conversations built on long-term thinking and precision, subscribe. And if something here reflected your own experience, leave a comment, even a simple one. Some things aren't said when they're felt, they're said when they're understood. I never planned to say this, and this part is about what became clear once the truth stopped feeling personal and started feeling structural. That's an important shift. Personal truths depend on emotion. Structural truths depend on consistency. Once something becomes structural, it influences how you move without asking for attention. That's what happened here. I noticed that this understanding didn't sit in my emotions. It settled into my decisions. I didn't think about it often, but it showed up everywhere, and how I planned and how I prioritized and how I chose what deserved my energy and what didn't. That kind of influence doesn't come from a passing feeling. It comes from alignment. I paid attention to how nothing here required maintenance. I wasn't reinforcing it with thought or revisiting it for reassurance. It existed without supervision. When something holds without management, you stop checking on it. You trust it. Trust doesn't announce itself. It reorganizes you quietly. I also noticed how clarity didn't narrow my world, it expanded it. I wasn't closing off possibilities or boxing myself into future. I felt freer to move forward because nothing felt unresolved. Resolution doesn't trap you, it releases you, releases clarity in action. I never planned to say this because I wanted to be certain that this understanding wasn't context dependent. I watched how it behaved across different environments, different moods, different levels of pressure. It didn't change. Consistency across conditions is proof. Proof doesn't need emphasis. I noticed that my expectations stayed reasonable. I wasn't asking for more than what was sustainable. I wasn't lowering standards to preserve comfort. Balance remained intact without effort. Effortless balance is rare. I also realized that I wasn't interpreting your actions. I was understanding them. Interpretation fills gaps with assumption. Understanding removes the gaps altogether. That difference changed everything. Understanding is quiet confidence. I never planned to say this because I didn't want words to create a narrative that reality couldn't support. Narratives can be compelling. Systems have to work. I wanted something that worked. This worked. I observed how silence didn't accumulate meaning. It didn't turn into tension or uncertainty. Silence stayed neutral. Neutral silence indicates trust beneath the surface. Trust that doesn't require conversation is powerful. I noticed how time didn't feel like something to manage. I wasn't counting milestones or measuring progress. Progress happened naturally. Natural progress doesn't need to be tracked. It's visible through stability. Stability is progress. I never planned to say this because I didn't want expression to outpace understanding. Expression without understanding creates imbalance. Now they're aligned. Alignment allows precision. I also noticed how my emotional state stayed regulated. No spikes, no drops, just steadiness. Steadiness allows clear thinking. Clear thinking prevents regret. Regret comes from haste. I never planned to say this because I wanted to be sure that this truth didn't require your response to remain valid. It doesn't. It stands on its own. Independence is a sign of authenticity. Authentic truth doesn't cling. I noticed how this understanding didn't demand change from either of us. It didn't ask for performance or adjustment. It fit as we were. When something fits, it doesn't require reshaping. Reshaping causes stir. I never planned to say this because I respect the weight of naming something real. Naming changes how people relate to it. I waited until naming went distorted. Now it won't. I also noticed that I didn't rehearse saying this. There was no script, no timing strategy. It didn't need one. When words are accurate, they don't need staging. Accuracy speaks plainly. I never planned to say this because I didn't want to create a moment. Moments fade. Understanding lasts. This wasn't about creating impact. It was about acknowledging reality. Reality doesn't need drama. I noticed that nothing here was fueled by anticipation. I wasn't waiting for a response or outcome. I wasn't hoping for confirmation. That absence of expectation told me this wasn't attachment, it was recognition. Recognition is calm. I never planned to say this because I wanted to be certain that this understanding didn't depend on proximity. Distance didn't weaken it. Space didn't threaten it. That resilience mattered. Resilience proves stability. I also noticed how respect remained intact, regardless of uncertainty. Respect that fluctuates isn't respect. This didn't fluctuate. Consistency defines value. I never planned to say this because I don't believe truth should be rushed. Rushing cheapens it. I waited until it could be said without pressure or consequence. Now it can. You need to hear this because clarity deserves honesty. Because leaving something unspoken once it's understood creates imbalance. Balance requires acknowledgement. Acknowledge where Brent doesn't demand response. It demands presence. And if you're listening to this and recognizing the moment when understanding stops feeling emotional and starts feeling foundational, you know exactly why this is being said. Now, if this part resonated with you, if you value clarity that doesn't depend on reaction, take a moment to like this video. If you appreciate grounded conversations built on long-term thinking, subscribe. And if something here reflected your own experience, leave a comment, even a simple one. Some truths aren't meant to move you emotionally. They're meant to steady you completely. I never planned to say this, and this part is about what happened once the truth stopped being something I understood and started being something I relied on. There's a difference. Understanding informs you. Reliance changes how you move. Once you rely on something, you build around it without hesitation. That's when I knew this wasn't temporary. I noticed that decisions became cleaner. Not easier, cleaner. I wasn't compensating for uncertainty or building buffers for emotional volatility. I wasn't hedging. When you remove instability from a system, you don't feel relief immediately, you feel precision. Precision shows up as fewer adjustments, fewer explanations, fewer directions. Precision is expensive to earn. I also noticed that I stopped preparing for conversations. There was no rehearsal, no framing, no anticipation of misunderstanding. I spoke plainly and expected the same clarity in return. That kind of communication only exists when trust has already done the work. Trust did the work. I never planned to say this because I wanted to see if reliance would create pressure. It didn't. Pressure appears when something isn't strong enough to carry weight. This carried weight quietly. Quiet strength is the most reliable kind. Reliability changes everything. And notice how silence behaved over time. It didn't accumulate attention. It didn't generate stories. It didn't need to be filled. Silence stayed neutral, even constructive. That told me the connection wasn't fueled by reassurance. It was sustained by understanding. Understanding doesn't need noise. I also noticed how boundaries weren't negotiated repeatedly. They're recognized. Recognition without resistance is a sign of respect that doesn't depend on outcome. Respect that depends on outcome is a transaction. This wasn't transactional. It was principled. I never planned to say this because I wanted to be sure that reliance didn't lead to complacency. It didn't. It led to better maintenance. When something matters and works, you don't take it for granted.